She spent years mastering the art of disappearing hoodies, pulled tight eyes, lowered footsteps, soft enough to erase herself from the world. After losing her career, her marriage, and her name to a lie she never told, Claire believed invisibility was the only safe place left. But the night she finally stepped out of those layers and walked into the Winterlight's benefit, wearing a dress that revealed the woman she used to be, something shifted. Her boss, steady, grieving kind, looked up, and in one stunned heartbeat he saw her. Not the rumor, not the shadow, not the woman hiding in oversized fleece. He saw the truth she'd buried for years. But when his eyes widened, when the room fell still, when the moment froze between who she'd been and who she could become, Claire realized the most dangerous thing wasn't being seen. It was being seen by a man who cared. Stay with me, because this is where her story truly begins. The neon sign above Hayes Family Diner sputtered twice before holding its soft red glow against the dark Colorado morning. Snow had been pushed to both sides of the narrow street, forming uneven walls that shimmered under the street lamps. The air was so still that even the cold seemed to pause and listen. Claire Whitmore stepped out of her old Subaru with the careful quiet of someone afraid to disturb the world. She pulled her oversized hoodie tighter around her sleeves, hanging past her fingers, and crossed the small parking lot. Her boots left shallow prints on the fresh powder prints that would be gone as soon as the plows came by again. It was barely 5:30. The town wouldn't wake for another hour, which was exactly why she chose this time. The diner was a place she loved, but only when it belonged to her alone, when laughter, conversation, and eyes weren't yet filling the room. Inside, the warmth greeted her like an old shy friend. The scent of coffee grounds, last night's cinnamon rolls, and the faintest trace of bacon lingered in the air. She slipped behind the counter without turning on more lights than necessary, letting the quiet stay intact. Claire moved through the diner as though she had memorized every inch because she had. She refilled napkin holders, wiped counters, checked the register, and gathered invoices for the morning's bookkeeping. Each task, carefully repeated, wrapped her in a sense of certainty she didn't question. She reached up to push a stray wisp of hair back into her tight bun, the same bun she wore every day. It pulled at her scalp, but it kept everything controlled, tucked away. Her hoodie hung over a long apron that nearly swallowed her frame. On colder days, she wore 2 hoodies. In the summer, when others were sweating in light shirts, she still wore baggy layers, claiming she just ran cold. Most people accepted the explanation. No one asked further, and truthfully, she felt safer that way. In a town of fewer than 6,000 people, where everyone knew everyone else's business, Claire had managed the surprising feat of being forgettably invisible. Customers saw her without really seeing her. Staff waved but rarely tried to get close. She wasn't unfriendly, just quiet, consistently tucked into the background. Just Claire from the back office. Just Claire who handled the books. Just Claire who didn't ask for anything. She walked to the small office behind the kitchen, closing the door softly behind her. Here, the lights were dimmer, but she preferred it that way. Her normal t-shirt peeked out from under her hoodie, fitted just enough to remind her of the shape she tried so hard to erase. She hesitated, then pulled the hoodie off. The air inside the room felt colder without its cocoon. She grabbed a larger, shapeless fleece hanging on the back of the door and slipped into it, quickly sighing when she felt hidden again. She reached into a drawer for a calculator and froze. The photo was still there. She had meant to throw it away months ago, but something, a brittle mix of fear and longing, kept stopping her. The picture showed her younger, brighter, standing at a corporate banquet table in Denver. She wore a fitted navy blazer, hair loose in curls, makeup soft but elegant. She was smiling as though she belonged in that world. That Claire looked nothing like the woman who now hid under layers of fabric. That Claire had believed in her future before everything fell apart. Claire turned the photo face down, heart tapping against her ribs, and pushed the drawer shut as though sealing away a ghost. She tried to steady her breathing, but a door swung open in the distance, sending a quick echo through the diner. Footsteps. Heavy, familiar. Only one person walked like that at this hour. Daniel Hayes. Her boss. The man who owned the diner. The man everyone in town respected without question. The man Claire did her best to avoid, not because he was unkind, but because he noticed everything. She stepped out of the office, bracing herself. Daniel was hanging his coat in the back corner, steam rising from the coffee he'd already poured. He nodded at her as he always did. "Morning, Claire." "Morning," she replied, her voice soft, practiced, almost invisible. Usually that was the end of it. He would head to the grill or flip through schedules, and she would retreat behind her computer or into some quiet rhythm. But today, he didn't move. He looked at her, really looked, and she felt the sharp prickle of being seen. She instinctively tugged her fleece tighter around her. Daniel studied her for a second, his expression unreadable. There was no judgment in it, no curiosity sharpened like a blade, just steady awareness. The kind that made her want to both step back and step forward. "You know," he said quietly, "you don't have to come in before the sun just to avoid people." The words fell between them like a dropped glass. Claire stopped breathing. Not a muscle moved. In that single moment, the little world she had built, the routine, the armor, the invisibility, felt suddenly fragile. Not broken, just touched, just noticed. Her pulse fluttered against her neck. Heat rose beneath her layers of fabric. She didn't know what frightened her more, his accuracy or his kindness. Outside, the diner's neon sign flickered again, casting a faint red glow across the empty booths. Inside, Claire felt the ground shift, the first small crack forming in the shell she had lived inside for years. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words refused to come. And Daniel, seeing the way she froze, simply nodded once, as if to say, "I didn't mean to startle you." Then he turned back toward the grill, giving her space. But the sentence lingered in the warm air like breath on a cold window pane. She wondered what he would say, what he would think if he ever learned why she did. And for the first time in a long time, Claire wasn't sure she wanted to keep hiding. Daniel Hayes was the kind of man who filled a room without ever raising his voice. He carried himself with a quiet steadiness, the sort that made people lean in just a little closer, trusting that whatever he said would be worth hearing. Maybe it was the years of running the diner with his late wife. Maybe it was simply who he'd always been. He slipped behind the grill that morning, tying on his apron with practiced movements. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened when he focused, a mix of age, sunlight, and the kind of grief that never fully left a man after burying the love of his life. But even so, there was warmth in him, something solid that others depended on. Claire watched him from the office doorway, though she pretended to be studying a stack of invoices. Daniel didn't know she observed him, sometimes the way he checked on each staff member, with quiet care. Making sure the high school kids working weekends weren't overwhelmed, that older regulars got their usual table, that the grill stayed seasoned just the way his wife used to like it. He wasn't flashy, he didn't flirt, but he noticed things. And that alone made Claire nervous. The breakfast crowd came slowly at first, a trickle of early risers seeking warmth and coffee. Daniel handled the grill with ease, eggs, sizzling bacon, curling hash browns, crisping to gold. Between orders, he glanced toward the office as if making sure Claire was still there. She was bent over the invoices, her handwriting small and tidy. Every bill, every line item, every vendor charge, she checked them all by hand before entering them into the software. It was a habit she'd developed long before this diner, long before her life had unraveled. Numbers were the one place where truth lived. They didn't lie unless someone forced them to. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and approached her with a mug of fresh coffee. "You're doing vendor statements already?" he asked, leaning lightly against the doorframe. "I couldn't sleep," she said without looking up. He didn't miss the tremor in her voice, but he didn't press. Instead, he pointed to the stack in front of her. "You know, the accounting software auto-detects duplicate charges, right?" "Yes," she replied softly. "And you still do it all by hand?" "Yes." He paused, studying her profile, the rigid way she held her shoulders, the tight bun pulling at her hairline, the fleece swallowing her shape. She always looked ready to retreat like a deer, unsure whether the world was safe. "Why?" he asked gently. She hesitated, pen frozen above an invoice. Then, without raising her eyes, she said, "I've seen what happens when no one's watching the numbers." Daniel didn't miss the weight in those words. They were simple, but they carried something heavy, experience, maybe even hurt. He wanted to ask more, but the look on her face told him this was as much as she could give right now. Then keep doing it your way, he said softly. It matters. He turned to go, but before he could take 2 steps, Claire said quietly, "There's a duplicate charge from the supplier in Greeley. They billed us twice for the pork order last week." Daniel blinked. "Seriously, that's almost $300. "I know." She slid the invoice toward him. "I'll call them this afternoon." He let out a low whistle. "You just saved us half a week of breakfast bacon." A tiny smile, barely there but visible, if someone cared enough to look, touched her lips before she hid it. As the morning rush grew, Claire stayed in the office, her presence nearly silent, but her work rippled through the diner in ways no one saw. Vendors stayed honest. Schedules stayed balanced. Payroll ran smoothly. The kind of invisible excellence that made everything look effortless from the outside. Daniel saw it though. More and more lately, he found himself noticing the subtle things she did to keep the diner steady. And more than that, he noticed the things she didn't let herself do. Look people in the eye, take up space, speak up unless necessary. He caught her on his way to refill the salad bar later that morning. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I need to ask you something." Her shoulders tensed. "Did I make a mistake?" "No," he said quickly. Quite the opposite. He set down the tray he was carrying and leaned against the doorframe again, the way he only did when he wanted her full attention. "The bank manager is coming by next week. We've been talking about adding a second dining room. Nothing fancy, just more space for summer traffic." She listened, wary. "I want you to sit in on the meeting," he continued. "You understand our finances better than anyone." Her immediate reaction was a shake of the head. "No, Daniel, I'm just the back office." He held her gaze steady, calm, not demanding, just present. "Claire," he said, "you're the only one I trust to see what I might be missing." Something in the room shifted then. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle tightening in her chest, a flutter she didn't quite recognize. Trust. He trusted her. She swallowed, trying to find words. I don't really handle meetings." "You don't need to handle anything. Just be there. Look at the numbers. Tell me what's off. That's all." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And Daniel accepted that as progress. "Think about it," he said gently before returning to the grill. Claire stayed in the doorway longer than she meant to her heart, tapping a strange rhythm. For years she had worked to become invisible layers of fabric, early mornings, quiet footsteps. But for the first time in a long while, someone was looking a little closer. She wasn't sure whether that scared her, or whether it was something she'd been needing without realizing it. The first snow of December had dusted the lake like powdered sugar, turning the town's shoreline into something out of a postcard. Strings of white lights wrapped around the trees near the community center, flickering in the late afternoon wind. The banners were already up: Winter Lights Benefit, Saturday night, 6 p.m. Everyone in town knew the event. It wasn't fancy, not in the way Denver galas were, but it mattered here. Local businesses sponsored tables, neighbors donated silent auction items, and the whole town gathered in one place under the glow of lanterns and cold stars. Inside the diner, talk of the benefit filled the space like steam from fresh biscuits. "You going this year? You see the mayor's new banner? Heard the haze? Diner is getting an award for the food pantry." Claire listened without looking up. She knew about the award. She handled all the donations, all the spreadsheets, all the reconciliations. But she never imagined being part of the ceremony. She preferred her invisible place behind the office door where no one asked questions. Daniel approached her near the register that afternoon. He held a clipboard, but his tone told her this wasn't about schedules. "Town committee reached out," he said. "They asked me to bring staff to the Winter Lights benefit." Claire nodded, offering a neutral, safe response. "That's nice. The kids will enjoy it. I want you to come." Her hand jerked just slightly, but enough for him to notice. "Me?" she asked, hoping she'd misunderstood. "You?" he said. "The award is for the diner's work with the food pantry. And you're the one who kept the numbers straight all year. You should be there." The air inside Claire thinned. Fancy clothes, crowds, eyes, phones with cameras. Her pulse shot upward as though every fear she'd buried clawed to the surface at once. "I don't." She backed a step, then another. "Daniel, I'm not really someone who..." attends things. He studied her, not judging, just watching the way he did when something mattered. "If you don't want to go, I won't push," he said. She felt her lungs loosen a little, but he continued gently, "It bothers me that you'd rather vanish than let people see what you've done for them." The words struck deeper than he could have known. Claire wasn't sure what expression crossed her face, but it made Daniel step back, giving her space. She gripped the counter to steady herself. "What I've done," she whispered. He nodded. "You organized every donation. You made sure families had meals before Thanksgiving. People depend on this diner more than they realize because of you. The award is yours as much as mine." She shook her head quickly, as if trying to outrun the weight of his belief. "Daniel, I don't want attention. I don't want people looking at me." "Why?" he asked softly. She opened her mouth, but the truth tangled in her throat. In an instant, her imagination filled the diner with the ghosts of her past. Whispers from her old office, stairs in hallways, a news article with her name in bold letters under the words "possible misconduct," a photo someone snapped at the wrong time, the wrong angle. She saw all of it like it was yesterday. "I just can't," she finally breathed. "Please don't ask me to go." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her or push or guilt trip. He simply nodded, accepting her fear without dismissing it. "All right," he said softly. "If you're not ready, that's your call." But then he paused. Not long, just enough for his next words to settle somewhere she couldn't ignore. "Just know," he added, "you deserve to be seen for the good you've done. Even if you don't believe that yet." Her chest tightened. The room felt smaller somehow. He walked away to help a customer, leaving her standing alone at the counter with the echo of his words lingering like heat after a flame. It bothered him that she'd rather vanish. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him to care at all. She'd mastered invisibility, early mornings, oversized clothes, eyes fixed downward. She thought no one noticed. But Daniel had. He'd been noticing her in small ways she didn't fully understand. She turned toward the office, the fleece brushing against her arms as she walked. Inside, the dim light felt suffocating. She moved instinctively to the drawer where the photo was hidden. Her hand hovered above the handle, but she couldn't bring herself to open it this time. Instead, she sat down, elbows on the desk, pressing her palms into her eyes. She imagined the winter lights benefit, the music, the chatter, the warm glow of lanterns reflected on the lake. She pictured herself there, standing next to Daniel as he accepted the award. She pictured people realizing she wasn't just the shy woman hiding in the back. Then the darker images slipped in, the article resurfacing, someone recognizing her name, the whispers starting again. Her breath hitched. No, she couldn't do that. Not again. But Daniel's voice came back to her in a steady rhythm, softer than her fears, but clearer than her doubts. "It bothers me that you'd rather vanish." She wasn't used to anyone being bothered by her absence. She wasn't sure how to hold that, or whether it was something she should want. Outside the office, she heard Daniel laugh with that quiet warmth so rare in men who'd known loss. It stirred something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Small, fragile, but present. Claire stood unable to sit any longer. She walked to the doorway, watching Daniel help a customer with directions to the lake trail. He looked over his shoulder at her as if sensing her gaze. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then Claire stepped back into the office, her heart heavy with conflict she wasn't ready to name. She didn't know whether she would go to the winter lights benefit. She only knew the question wasn't as simple as yes or no anymore. Something had shifted. And shifts she knew could be dangerous, or they could be the beginning of something she wasn't sure she deserved. The diner had softened into its late afternoon quiet, that gentle pause between the lunch rush and the dinner crowd. Outside, snow drifted in lazy spirals, settling against the windows in thin, lacy patterns. Inside, the only sounds were the low hum of the heater and the soft clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. Martha Lane sat in her usual booth by the window, a place where she could watch the town breathe. At 66, she carried the calm certainty of someone who'd lived enough life to know what mattered and what didn't. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose twist, her coat draped over the seat beside her, and a book lay open but forgotten at her elbow. She noticed Claire the moment she stepped out of the office. The younger woman moved like a shadow, quiet, careful, shrinking herself in ways Martha had observed for months but hadn't named out loud. Today, though, something was different. There was a tightness in Claire's shoulders, a tremor to her breath. She wiped the same section of counter 3 times, focused not on the surface but on something far away inside her own mind. Martha watched her a moment longer, then raised a hand. "Sweetheart," she called gently. "Could I trouble you for a refill?" Claire turned startled. "Oh, yes. Of course. Sorry I didn't see you there." Martha smiled, warm and patient. "I've been sitting in this booth for the last hour. I'd hoped someone saw me." Claire flushed. "Sorry, I've just been distracted." "I can tell," Martha said softly. "Sit for a minute." "Oh no, I should get back, Claire." Martha's tone shifted just slightly. Not stern but steady. The tone of a woman who'd once kept classrooms full of restless children in line without raising her voice. "Sit." Claire hesitated, then slid into the booth across from her. The warmth of the coffee mug felt good against her chilled fingers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Martha let the silence settle, not forcing anything, simply waiting the way only older folks know how comfortable with stillness. "You've been carrying something heavy today," she finally murmured. Claire stared down at the steam curling from her cup. "It's nothing. Just work." "Honey," Martha said, "I taught middle school for 35 years. I know when someone's telling me half a story." A small involuntary laugh escaped Claire, barely there but real. Martha leaned in. "Is this about the town benefit?" Color rose to Claire's cheeks. "Daniel asked me to go. To represent the diner. But I can't. I don't belong at something like that." "Why not? It's complicated." Martha arched a brow. "Complicated tends to mean painful. And pain gets smaller when you speak it out loud." Claire swallowed hard. For a moment she looked like she might bolt right out the door. But Martha didn't push further. She simply waited, letting the younger woman choose her moment. And Claire did. She stared at the swirling foam on her coffee, voice barely above a whisper. "I used to be an accountant." "In Denver?" Martha nodded, encouraging. "I worked for a financial firm, nothing huge, but big enough to matter. I loved the work, the structure, the precision. Numbers made sense to me." She paused, breath shuddering. "My supervisor, he didn't like that I double-checked his audits. I thought I was helping. He said I was overstepping." Martha's eyes softened. "Let me guess. You found something he didn't want found." Claire's throat tightened. "He changed numbers. Money was missing. Someone had to take the blame." "Oh, sweetheart. The investigation didn't prove anything. Not about him. Not about me. Inconclusive, they called it. But that didn't matter. Rumors move faster than truth." Martha reached across the table, resting her wrinkled hand lightly on Claire's. "He let them believe you did it," she said, not as a question, but as a truth she already knew. Claire nodded, lips pressing together to keep her voice steady. "My husband." She blinked rapidly, the memory sharp enough to sting. "He said he believed me, but I could see the doubt. Every time my phone buzzed. Every time the news ran an update. Eventually, he packed a bag and said he needed space. And that was that." Martha drew in a slow breath, grief for this young woman settling in her chest. "That's when you left Denver?" she asked softly. "I didn't know where else to go. I just wanted a place where no one knew my name, where no one would look at me and wonder what I'd done." And so Martha said gently, "You wrapped yourself in layers, clothes that hide you, hours that keep you out of sight, silence that keeps people from asking questions." Claire's eyes glistened. "I didn't come here to start over. I came here to disappear." Martha squeezed her hand. "No. You came here because some part of you was still alive enough to want a second chance. People who truly want to disappear don't take jobs where they help feed a community. They don't show up every day before dawn. And they don't keep this place running behind the scenes." Claire looked up, startled by the firmness in Martha's voice. "You've got more strength than you realize," the older woman said. "And more goodness, too." The words hit Claire, somewhere deep, somewhere tender. She drew a shaky breath. Martha sat back, a knowing smile touching her lips. Now then, all that talk of the benefit. You got a dress, Claire stared. What? A dress, sweetheart? You can't go to the winter lights in that hoodie unless they start a new category for most likely to disappear on a snowy night. Martha, I told you I'm not going. Martha stood pulling on her coat. Come on, there's a boutique 2 blocks down. We're just going to look. I'm not going, Claire insisted again, though her voice wavered. Then you've got nothing to lose by trying on one dress. Just one. For fun. Claire opened her mouth to protest, but for reasons she couldn't explain, the words fell apart before reaching her lips. She found herself rising from the booth, following Martha toward the door. Stepping out into the cold evening air, her heart thudding with something she couldn't name, fear maybe, or something softer, something dangerously close to hope. The boutique Martha chose sat quietly between a knitting shop and a hardware store, its windows glowing soft amber against the cold street. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender sachets, the kind older women tucked in drawers to keep sweaters fresh. Claire stepped in reluctantly, her fingers curled around the sleeves of her oversized fleece as though it were the last shield she had. Martha moved with purpose, flipping through racks with the efficiency of someone who had been dressing people emotionally and spiritually for decades. Claire hovered behind her, half wishing she'd never agreed to come, half unable to pull herself away. Then Martha stopped. A simple dark green dress rested on her arm. Not flashy, not tight, just clean lines, soft fabric, and a depth of color that reminded Claire of pine forests after rain. This, Martha declared, is your dress. Claire shook her head instantly. Martha, no. I told you I'm not going. You said you'd try one dress. This is the one. Before Claire could protest again, she found herself in the fitting room curtain, closed dress in hand. Her heart hammered as she slipped out of her sweaters and hoodies, the air against her skin unfamiliar. When she pulled the dress on, it slid into place like it had been waiting for her. She stared at her reflection, the woman in the mirror. She knew her. She feared her. She missed her. Her hair, normally pulled so tight it gave her headaches, fell in soft waves after Martha undid the bun. A pair of modest heels lifted her posture, just slightly enough to remind her she once carried herself tall. The green of the dress made her eyes look warmer, more alive. I don't look like me, she whispered. Martha stepped behind her, meeting her gaze in the mirror. Honey, you look exactly like you. The you before life knocked the breath out of you. Claire's throat tightened, emotion swelling dangerously close. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. I'm not going to the benefit, she said, though the conviction wasn't as strong as it had been earlier. That's fine, Martha said lightly. But if you were going, this would be the dress. That night, Claire went home with the dress in a paper bag she pretended not to notice. Saturday arrived too quickly. Snowflakes drifted softly around the community center by the lake, drawn toward the glow of string lights looping from post to post. Mason jars filled with little battery candles lined the walkway, flickering like tiny warm hearts against the cold Colorado night. Inside, the hall buzzed with laughter, chatter, and the jingle of the band warming up their instruments. People greeted each other with hugs and stories. The mayor stood near the stage. The Farmers Association table overflowed with pies. The hardware store crew wore matching flannel shirts. Daniel Hayes stood near the front, speaking with the mayor about the food pantry award. He wore a black suit, simple, clean, nothing extravagant. On another man, it might have been too plain. On Daniel, it was steady and honest, exactly who he was. He scanned the crowd absently, not expecting to see Claire. She had been clear she wasn't coming. He respected that, even if a quiet part of him hoped she might change her mind. He was answering a question about donation logistics when the main doors opened again, letting in a swirl of cold air. He glanced over, and for a moment he didn't recognize the woman who stepped inside. Her hair soft waves resting against her shoulders, her dress dark green drawing the light toward her instead of away. Her posture uncertain but present, not folded into invisibility. She hesitated at the doorway, clutching the strap of a small black handbag. Her eyes scanned the crowd, nervous, calculating escape routes, and then landing on him. Daniel's breath caught. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't the transformation. It was the sudden recognition of a strength she had been burying under fleece and silence. She looked like someone who'd been hurt, yes, but who was still standing, still trying, still brave enough to show up, even when fear roared inside her. He excused himself from the mayor mid-sentence. His steps slowed as he approached her, not wanting to spook her the way a loud sound might startle a deer near the tree line. When he reached her, he stopped at a respectful distance. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said softly, reverently, "Claire, you look like yourself." Her breath shuddered. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her handbag. Out of all the things she expected, compliments, awkward smiles, polite remarks, this was not one of them. You look like yourself. Not the version she'd hidden, not the version the world had hurt. The version she thought was gone. A warmth rose behind her ribs, slow and unfamiliar, and it terrified her more than judgment ever had. "Is that good?" she whispered. "It's honest," he said, eyes holding hers with quiet steadiness. "And it's good." Before she could respond, a flash erupted beside them, quick, bright, unmistakable. A camera. Someone from the local paper stood near the punch bowl, snapping photos of attendees for tomorrow's community section. Daniel didn't pay it much attention. But Claire froze. Photos had once ruined her life. Photos had once rewritten her story. Photos had once been used as evidence of lies she never told. Her heart lurched painfully, her breath catching in her throat as fear surged like a wave she couldn't outrun. Daniel noticed instantly. "Hey," he murmured, reaching out but not touching her. "It's just the town paper. Nothing more." But Claire wasn't hearing him. She wasn't seeing the room anymore. She was seeing her past headlines, accusations, an image captured without her permission. She swallowed, hard eyes darting toward the exit, and Daniel saw at the moment a woman who had just dared to be seen, considered disappearing again. Snow still clung to the roofs the morning after the Winter Lights benefit, but inside Hayes' family diner, the atmosphere was buzzing, warmer, noisier than usual. People were still riding the high of last night, retelling speeches, laughing about the mayor, tripping on a string-like cable, bragging about whose pie won the silent auction. Claire kept her eyes on the register, praying the morning rush would swallow her whole. But it didn't. It did the opposite. "Claire, we saw you at the benefit. My goodness, you looked lovely." A regular from the quilting club leaned over the counter with a beaming smile. Claire felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "Oh, thank you," she murmured. Another voice chimed in. "That green dress. Honey, you should wear color more often." Claire forced a smile, her heart thudding. Compliments felt like spotlights, too bright, too revealing. Then, someone dropped the newspaper beside the coffee machine. The front page was the usual town chatter, but the inside spread featured photos from the benefit. And there she was, standing beside Daniel, smiling, looking alive. She froze. The picture wasn't unkind. It wasn't twisted. It wasn't manipulated. But the simple act of seeing herself in print again, her real face captured without warning, sent a shock through her entire body. Her last experience with public photos had nearly destroyed her. She swallowed hands, trembling slightly as she turned away from the paper. She tried to focus on brewing coffee, lining up mugs, anything that would anchor her. But the door chimed, and a man entered, a traveler, judging by the worn parka and out-of-state plates on the truck outside. He ordered black coffee, looked around idly, and then his gaze landed on the newspaper open to her picture. He paused. Then he looked at Claire. Really looked. Her insides twisted. He approached the counter slowly, tilting his head. "Hey, aren't you?" He snapped his fingers as if searching his memory. "You're that accountant from Denver, right? The one who, what was it? Lost a bunch of money." The diner went still. Every voice, every fork, every breath seemed to pause mid-air. Claire's stomach dropped so violently she had to grip the counter to stay upright. Her vision blurred at the edges. The man continued, oblivious, or worse, unconcerned. "I remember the article. People said you doctored reports or something." "Shame to. You seemed smart." A whisper ran through the diner. Someone pulled out a phone. It was happening again. The same story. The same judgment. The same humiliation. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel herself shrinking the way she'd shrunk before curling inward, disappearing behind fabric, behind silence, behind walls. Then a deep voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, Daniel?" He stepped out from the kitchen towel over his shoulder jaw, set in a way Claire had never seen on him. His eyes, usually so patient, were sharp now, protective. The traveler shrugged. "No problem. Just making conversation. Didn't think you'd hire someone with a history," and he didn't get to finish the sentence. Daniel took one step closer, planting himself between Claire and the man, his voice calm but edged with iron. "If you have a problem with my staff," he said, "then you have a problem with me. Completely. If you can't treat her with respect, you're welcome to take your coffee to go." The man blinked, taken aback. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." "Then don't," Daniel replied. A slow beat passed. Then the traveler muttered something under his breath, grabbed his coffee and left, pushing the door open so hard the bell above it rattled wildly. When he was gone, the hush lingered. People looked at Claire with new expressions, not judgment now but concern. Curiosity, sympathy, a few embarrassed for having listened to the rumors at all. She stood motionless, her face pale, her breath uneven, her fingers gripping the counter as if it were the only solid thing in the world. Daniel turned to her. His voice softened instantly. "Claire." She blinked but didn't answer. He stepped closer, not touching her, just grounding the space between them. "You okay?" she swallowed, trying to find her voice. But all she could manage was a whisper. "It's happening again." Daniel shook his head gently. "No. Not this time." She turned her eyes toward him, searching for something steady in the chaos rising inside her. He held her gaze unwavering. "I'm not letting rumors decide who you are," he said quietly. "Not here. Not ever." Her throat tightened, tears burning hot behind her eyes. She looked away quickly, unwilling to let the diner witness her unraveling. But Daniel noticed. He noticed everything, and instead of letting her disappear into herself again, he stayed there, solid, present, a quiet shield between her and the world. It was the first time in years someone had defended her out loud. The first time someone hadn't doubted her, questioned her, or stepped away. And the weight of that, the tenderness of that, was almost more terrifying than the rumors themselves. Because if someone believed in her this much, what would she do if she lost him too? The diner had long emptied out by the time Daniel flipped the sign to closed. Snow tapped gently against the windows, each flake catching the streetlight outside before melting into the dark. Claire stood near the register, wiping down the same spot for the third time, though it was already clean. "Claire," Daniel said quietly. "Can you stay a few minutes?" She stilled. Not because he sounded angry, not because he sounded like her boss, but because he sounded like someone carrying questions he didn't want to force on her. She set the cloth down. "All right." He motioned toward a booth in the far corner, the one usually reserved for old regulars or late-night truckers. Tonight it felt like a small island set apart from the rest of the world. They sat across from each other, a salt shaker between them, the overhead lights dimmed to a gentle gold. Daniel rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, but didn't speak right away. He gave her space to settle or to run if she chose. She appreciated that more than he knew. "About earlier," he finally said, "when that guy recognized you." Her chest tightened. "You don't owe me an explanation," he added quickly, "but I don't like watching you be afraid of something you didn't do. If you want to talk, I'm here." Claire looked down at her hands, sleeves pulled over her knuckles as always, her armor, her safety. But tonight, for reasons she didn't fully understand, she wanted to set some of that burden down. If only for a moment. She drew in a slow breath. "I haven't told anyone in this town the whole story," she said softly. "Not even Martha." Daniel nodded once. "Then I'm honored you'd tell me." Her throat tightened at his sincerity. She didn't deserve that, but she continued anyway, voice fragile but steady. "I used to work at a mid-sized firm in Denver," she began. "Corporate accounting, long hours, high pressure. But I liked the work. It made sense to me." She paused, eyes drifting to the window where snow blurred the outside world. "My supervisor was a man named Evan Merrick. Everyone thought he was brilliant, charming, silver-tongued, the kind of guy the executives trusted without question. Said I had talent, that he wanted to mentor me." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. he didn't interrupt. At first I thought it was genuine. He gave me projects no one else got. Meetings with senior partners. It felt like the start of something good. Her voice dipped. Until the day it didn't. She swallowed hard. One afternoon I found discrepancies in an audit he'd signed off on. Numbers shifted. Funds misallocated. When I brought it to him, he smiled like I'd said something amusing and told me to adjust the documentation so it matched his projections. Daniel's expression darkened, but he remained still steady, listening. I refused, Claire whispered. I told him it wasn't ethical. He said I was being dramatic, that no one got hurt when numbers moved around, that the partners expected certain results. A faint tremor ran through her. After that conversation, everything changed. Emails I never sent were somehow attached to my username, files modified from my account, and then, missing funds. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose, controlled, but clearly furious on her behalf. They blamed you, he said quietly. There was an investigation, Claire replied, bitterness, soft but unmistakable. HR said they couldn't prove anything, but the rumors spread anyway. People whispered in the halls, stared at me during meetings. My reputation was ruined even before the review ended. She looked away, eyes stinging. And then there was my husband. Daniel sat up slightly, listening harder. He told me he believed me, she said, but every time my phone buzzed, he'd glance at it. Every time an article came out, he'd ask if there was something I wasn't telling him. Eventually, he packed a bag and said he needed space. Her voice cracked. He never came back. Silence filled the booth, heavy but real, not uncomfortable. Daniel didn't rush to fill it, didn't offer platitudes or pity. He simply absorbed her words, like a man willing to hold truth without trying to reshape it. Claire wiped at her cheek, quickly embarrassed. That's why I dress like this, she whispered. The layers, the hoodies, the early mornings. If people are going to judge me, at least let it be for my work, not for how I look. I don't want eyes on me, ever. Daniel's face softened, not with pity, but with understanding. He leaned back, letting her see he wasn't going anywhere. Claire, he said after a long, thoughtful pause, you did the right thing, and you paid the price for it. She swallowed, bracing for judgment, but he continued, voice gentle, firm. That doesn't make you guilty, he said. That makes you braver than most men I know. Her breath caught. Of all the things he could have said, I'm sorry, that's awful, you didn't deserve that, none of them would have struck her as deeply as this simple truth. Brave. He thought she was brave. She pressed a hand to her mouth as tears welled again, sudden and overwhelming, not from pain this time, but from the shocking ache of being understood. Being believed. Being seen without being judged. Daniel slid a napkin across the table, not intruding, just offering. She took it with a trembling smile. He didn't say more. Didn't need to. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone with her story. And that was enough to crack something fragile open inside her, something she thought she'd buried under fabric and fear and silence. The heater hummed softly. Snow drifted past the windows in slow spirals. And in the quiet booth at the back of the diner, Claire felt the smallest flicker of relief, like a candle lit in a long, dark room. A candle she wasn't sure she was ready for, but suddenly couldn't imagine blowing out. The following week brought a sudden rush of customers through the diner, skiers from out of town, families stopping for hot meals, locals escaping the cold. The bell over the door jingled non-stop from sunrise to late afternoon. Trays clattered the grill, hissed, and laughter tumbled through the air like warm bread from the oven. Daniel moved between stations with practiced ease, but even he couldn't be everywhere at once. 3 times he had to settle minor conflicts between teenagers on the staff. And invoices. Well, the stack on his desk was starting to look like a small mountain range. Claire noticed everything. She noticed the weariness in Daniel's shoulders, the way he paused before signing vendor forms like he didn't fully trust them, the missed calls from suppliers, the growing pile of staff schedules that never quite matched up. She quietly made corrections when she could, but there was only so much she could fix from the shadows. By Friday evening, Daniel stepped into the office with a look she couldn't immediately read, half determined, half nervous. He closed the door behind him, which he rarely did. Claire, he began, I need more help running this place. She blinked. "I already help." "You do," he said, smiling. "More than anyone else. But it's time I make it official." Her pulse picked up. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a folded document from his back pocket and set it on the desk between them. "I want you to be assistant manager," he said, "and head of accounting." Silence fell so heavily that even the heater seemed to pause. Claire stared at the paper as though it were something dangerous. "It comes with a raise." Daniel went on, "a set of keys and your name on vendor agreements and payroll forms." He hesitated, then added, "Your name deserves to be on things now." Her throat tightened. "Daniel, I don't know if I can." "You can," he replied softly. "You already do everything except the title." "But the title is the problem," she whispered. He frowned, not in confusion but in understanding. "Because it makes you visible." Claire nodded, hands curling into her sleeves for safety. "If my name is on paperwork, on forms, on permits, anyone could see it." Her breath wavered. "What if my past gets dragged up again? What if people start to wonder why someone with my history is signing financial documents? What if I ruin your reputation?" Daniel didn't flinch. Or he said gently, "What if your name helps build it?" She looked up sharply. He held her gaze with the calm certainty of a man who meant every word. "You're the one who caught the vendor mistakes," he said. "You're the one who keeps us organized. You're the reason payroll has been accurate every single week since you arrived. People trust this diner because it runs smoothly. And you are a big part of that." Claire shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "But people will talk." "They already do," Daniel replied. "Some good, some bad. That's small-town life." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "But unlike the last place you worked, the people here will actually get to see who you are, not what someone else said about you." A breath shuddered out of her, half relief, half terror. She sank slowly into the chair, staring at the promotion contract. "It'll put me out front," she murmured. "People will expect things from me." "They already do," he echoed softly. "They just don't know your name yet." She let out a weak laugh, a nervous, breathless sound. Daniel hesitated, then rested a hand on the back of the opposite chair, not touching her, just grounding the space. "You don't have to say yes," he said. "I won't be disappointed. But I don't want fear deciding your future." That line settled deep, deeper than she was ready for. She looked at her reflection in the dark computer screen, loose strands of hair falling around her face, the faintest trace of confidence she didn't recognize. For so many years, fear had been her compass. Fear had chosen her clothing, her hours, her distance from others. Fear had crushed her into a smaller version of herself so completely that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be capable. And yet, she remembered the night at the Winter Lights benefit, the warmth of the dress. Daniel telling her, "You look like yourself." Maybe this version of her, the one sitting here trembling but not running, deserved a chance to exist too. She pressed her palms together tightly. "If I take this job," she began slowly, "I need a few things understood." Daniel nodded. "Anything. My past stays part of my story. I won't pretend it didn't happen. But I don't want it to define how people see me here. I want to earn respect through my work, through consistency, not through pity or explanations." "Agreed," Daniel said immediately. "And," she drew a shaking breath, "I want time to grow into this, to figure out who I'm supposed to be again." "You'll have it," he promised. "No rush. No expectations you don't set yourself." Her hands hovered over the contract. She picked up the pen. Her fingers trembled, not from reluctance, but from the sheer weight of stepping back into a world that once rejected her. She signed. Her name, Claire Whitmore, in ink for the first time in years. She stared at the signature as if she were seeing a ghost, or a beginning. Daniel didn't cheer, didn't clap, didn't overwhelm the moment. He simply said, with the quiet pride of someone witnessing someone else's rebirth, "Well done." Claire blinked hard, unable to speak, because for the first time since Denver, her name felt like something she could grow into again. Snow had been falling since dawn, thick and wet, coating Main Street in a dense blanket that muffled the world. The diner glowed warm against the gray morning, a refuge for travelers and locals alike. Claire moved behind the counter with a new sense of purpose, checking invoices, greeting regulars, training a young server on the register. The small, steady tasks of her new role gave her a hum of pride she wasn't used to feeling. She was beginning to breathe again. Beginning. The bell above the door chimed. Claire didn't look up at first. She was sorting delivery receipts, explaining to Angela, the teenage hostess, how to verify vendor quantities. But Angela's face shifted, eyes going wide with the startled curiosity of someone who'd just seen something out of place. Claire, she whispered. Claire glanced toward the entrance. A man stood just inside the door, brushing snow from the shoulders of his charcoal overcoat. His hair, dusted with gray at the temples, was meticulously styled. His shoes, polished leather, looked like they'd never touched a rural Colorado road, and he looked at the diner as if it were beneath him. Her stomach dropped. Ethan Cole. He hadn't changed much, maybe a little older, a little sharper around the eyes, but still carrying that same air of quiet calculation. The same cold confidence that made people doubt themselves before they doubted him. He smiled when he saw her. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly. Claire Whitmore, he said, voice smooth enough to mask the poison beneath it. Well, isn't this unexpected? Her fingers froze around the stack of receipts. Angela whispered. You okay? Claire forced the smallest nod, though her pulse hammered so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Ethan walked toward the counter, each step measured, deliberate. Heard you were out here, he said casually. Took me a while to find the right town, but you always did like quiet places. Claire inhaled slowly, trying to maintain composure. What do you want, Ethan? Oh, just coffee for now, he replied, sliding into a booth. But we should talk. It's been a long time. The booth he chose was in the corner, her corner, the place where she once hid in shadows and pages of spreadsheets. Seeing him there felt like watching a trespass occur in her own home. Claire brought a mug to his table, setting it down carefully, though her hand shook just slightly. You shouldn't be here, she said under her breath. Ethan leaned back, comfortably. Funny, that's what some people said about you. Her jaw clenched. Say what you came to say. His eyes gleamed with an unpleasant amusement. You've heard the company's under audit, he said, stirring his coffee. Full investigation this time. Internal. External. Government oversight. The works. Claire's blood went cold. Ethan watched her reaction like a scientist observing a lab specimen. People are nervous, he continued. Especially those who had, let's call it, exposure to the old financial records. You mean people who manipulated data, she said quietly. People who blamed others to save themselves. His smile didn't falter. Interpret however you like. Then he leaned closer. But when investigations open, they don't just look at the guilty ones. They look at everyone. Every signature. Every file touched. Claire's heart thudded painfully. Those files weren't mine, Ethan. You know that. Oh, I know what you said. He shrugged. But once a story starts, people tend to repeat it, and you know how the board loves a convenient scapegoat. Claire's breath trembled. What do you want? For a moment, his expression sharpened, icy, almost predatory. I want to make sure nothing resurfaces that complicates my life, he said plainly. If I go down, I'm not going alone. Her stomach twisted. So he continued lightly, my advice, stay invisible. Don't draw attention. Don't get too involved here. His eyes flicked to the office, to the set of keys Daniel had given her that now hung at her hip. It would be a shame, he murmured, if people started asking questions about your new position. Her breath stalled. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, to fight back, but a shadow shifted nearby. Daniel. He'd stepped out from the kitchen at some point during the conversation, maybe heading toward the register, maybe checking on her. He always checked on her now, and he heard enough. Not the whole conversation, but enough to understand the tone. The threat. The man. His back straightened. His gaze hardened, but instead of storming over, he paused, letting Claire decide whether she wanted him involved. She felt his presence like a quiet anchor. A silent, I'm here if you need me. She didn't look at him, but she knew he was waiting. Ethan stood up slowly, placing a few bills on the table. It really was nice seeing you, he said softly. Small world, isn't it? He buttoned his coat, straightened his collar, and walked past her toward the door. Before stepping out into the falling snow, he delivered one final line, so quiet only she could hear. The bell chimed as the door closed behind him. The diner's warmth felt thinner, now fragile somehow. Conversations had resumed around her, but everything sounded distant, watery, like she were underwater. Daniel stepped forward. "Claire," he said, low and steady. "Who was that?" She opened her mouth. But no words came. Only fear. Fear that history wasn't done with her. Fear that truth wasn't enough. Fear that she might lose everything again just when she dared to rebuild. Her breath caught, and Daniel, seeing the terror she couldn't hide, felt something fierce rise in his chest, a need to protect, to understand, to stand between her and whatever darkness had just walked out the door. But he said nothing yet. He let her have the silence, because he could see she was seconds away from breaking. Metal folding chairs lined up in uneven rows faced a long table where the mayor and council members sat with clipboards and styrofoam cups of coffee. Handwritten signs pointed to the agenda, taped on the wall: food pantry funding, business permits, community concerns. Claire sat 3 rows from the front, hands folded tightly in her lap. Martha was on her right, Daniel on her left. Their presence should have calmed her. Instead, it only reminded her of how much she had to lose. Her name was now on invoices, permits, donation records, all the paperwork that tonight's meeting would review. She had agreed to step into the light. Now she wondered if she'd done so too soon. The room filled slowly. Farmers in heavy jackets. Teachers with tote bags. Parents juggling restless kids. Daniel's mother, Margaret, sat near the front in her usual seat, her posture straight despite her age, her eyes sharp and thoughtful. If the town had a quiet moral compass, it was her. Claire tried to focus on the agenda, but every creak of the door set her teeth on edge. When Ethan Cole walked in, the air seemed to drop 10 degrees. He wore the same charcoal coat, the same polished shoes. He looked out of place among the flannels and worn denim, but he didn't appear the least bit uncomfortable. He scanned the room, spotted Claire, and gave a small knowing nod. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Daniel noticed. His jaw tightened, one hand closing around the back of her chair. Martha's fingers found Claire's and squeezed lightly, reminding her she wasn't alone. The mayor opened the meeting with the usual greetings, then moved quickly to the topic everyone cared about: the food pantry. "As you all know," he said, adjusting his glasses, "Hayes Family Diner has been instrumental in organizing donations this year. We're here to discuss renewing the partnership and approving the permits for expanded storage." He nodded toward Daniel. "We'd also like to recognize the administrative work behind the scenes. Miss Claire Whitmore has been handling the accounting." Heads turned. Claire felt dozens of eyes land on her at once. Some faces friendly, some curious, a few unreadable. She tried to breathe evenly. Before she could blink, Ethan raised his hand. "Yes?" the mayor asked. Ethan stood slowly, holding a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I think it's wonderful that the town has such generous support," he began smoothly. "But I have a question. Just a simple one, really." Claire's stomach clenched. "When we talk about public funds," Ethan continued, "and donations and community trust, shouldn't we be especially careful about who handles the money?" A murmur rippled through the room. The mayor frowned. "What exactly are you implying, Sir?" Ethan spread his hands as if in surrender. "Nothing at all. Just wondering if the council is aware that Miss Whitmore has a history in Denver. Papers were written, investigations were launched. Some people might call that relevant." Several heads turned again, sharper this time. Someone whispered. Someone else pulled out a phone. The word history seemed to echo off the walls. Claire's vision blurred. Her first instinct was to stand up and leave. Just walk out. Let them talk. Let them decide who she was without her. It wouldn't be the first time. She shifted in her seat, muscles tense to bolt. Martha's hand tightened around hers. "Stay," the older woman whispered. "Not for him, for you." On her other side, Daniel straightened, looking ready to speak, ready to step between her and the firing squad, forming in people's minds. She knew he would. With one sentence, he could shut Ethan down. He could shield her. But if she let him do that, Wouldn't she be hiding again? Just in a different way. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. For a long suspended moment she sat there, caught between the urge to escape and the urge to finally stop running. Then Claire Whitmore stood up. Her knees shook. Her palms were damp. Her voice wobbled on the first word. "Mr. Mayor," she said, loud enough to carry "May I respond." The room went quiet. All eyes shifted from Ethan to her. The mayor nodded. "Yes, Miss Whitmore, go ahead." Claire swallowed, forcing air into her lungs. She looked at no one and everyone all at once. "What he said is true," she began. "I do have a history in Denver." A sharper murmur. Someone shifted in their seat. Someone else cleared their throat. "I worked for an accounting firm there," she continued. "Several years ago, there was an internal investigation about missing funds. An article was published. My name was attached to it." She paused, feeling the weight of her own words. "The official report said the investigation was inconclusive," she said quietly. "No charges, no conviction. But the rumors, they were not inconclusive. They painted me as the problem." She forced herself to look at Ethan, then back at the town council. "What that report didn't say," she went on, voice gaining strength, "was that I refused to falsify numbers when my supervisor asked me to. I refused to sign off on manipulated data. After that, things appeared under my login that I didn't authorize. Files were changed, records altered. And when the questions began, I was the easiest person to blame." A deep silence settled in the hall. "No one cleared my name publicly," she said. "I lost my job, my marriage, my life as I knew it. I left the city because I didn't want to spend the rest of my years walking through grocery stores and wondering who believed I was a thief." Her hands shook slightly at her sides, but she didn't try to hide it. "When I came here," she said softly, "I did it, hoping I could just work. Quietly, honestly, without my past being the first thing people saw." She drew a breath, steady now. "I can't change what was said about me. I can't force anyone to believe me. But I can show up. I can work hard. I can earn trust, the slow way, one invoice, one donation, one honest ledger at a time." She glanced toward Daniel, then back to the council. "The diner's finances are open to review. So are the food pantry records. I welcome any audit you want to do." She lifted her chin just a fraction. "All I ask is that you look at who I am here. Not just who someone once accused me of being somewhere else." When she finished, the hall was so quiet she could hear the snow ticking softly against the windows. For a brief, terrifying moment, no one moved. Then Margaret Hayes stood up. Her movements were slow, but sure, the kind of certainty that came with a lifetime of deciding what side of a line she would stand on. She looked at Claire, then at Ethan, then at the council. "I'd rather trust someone," she said clearly, "who lost everything for doing the right thing, than someone who built their life on a lie." A beat of stunned silence. Then someone near the back nodded. Another person murmured, "That's right." A smattering of claps started, hesitant at first, then growing as more hands joined in. Not a standing ovation, not a roar. Just enough. Ethan's jaw tightened. He realized too late that he had misread this town. These people. This woman. Claire sank back into her seat, breath trembling, cheeks flushed but lighter somehow. As if a weight she'd carried alone for years had finally been set down in the middle of the room for everyone to see. Daniel leaned in just enough for her to hear him. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. And for the first time, when she heard those words, she almost believed them. The snow began to ease in the days following the town hall meeting, as if winter itself had exhaled. The sidewalks were still slick with ice, but the sun returned in soft glimmers, catching in the windows of the diner each morning. The world felt a little brighter. Or maybe Claire was finally letting herself notice the light again. She didn't overhaul her wardrobe overnight. That wasn't who she was. A soft blue blouse Martha insisted she try because it matched the quiet in her eyes. People noticed, not in the invasive way she feared, but in a gentle, neighborly way. "Morning, Claire," Mrs. Donnelly called when she stepped into the diner for her usual oatmeal. "Howdy, Claire," a rancher said with a tip of his hat. Even the teenagers on staff, who once whispered, Can you get, the bookkeeper now simply called out. Claire registers being weird again. Can you look? Her name settled into the air like it belonged there. Each time she braced herself for judgment, for suspicion. One afternoon she trained the new server, a shy 17-year-old named Piper, on the register. You don't have to rush, Claire told her gently. Accuracy matters more than speed. People will wait for honesty. Piper nodded earnestly, repeating each step. Thanks, Claire. You make it seem not scary. That sentence struck her more deeply than she expected. Someone saw her as steady, not fragile. It felt like a second heartbeat opening up inside her chest. Vendors too learned to respect her. When a supplier tried to sneak in an overcharge on produce, she caught it immediately. Frank, she said calmly over the phone, your invoice says, we ordered 30 pounds of potatoes. We ordered 20. I need the corrected copy before noon. By the next week, he addressed her with newfound courtesy. It was strange watching herself reclaim power in such subtle, everyday ways. And through all of it, Daniel was there. Not hovering, not controlling, simply present. They fell into a new rhythm. After closing, when the clatter of dishes faded and the last tables were wiped down, they would sit on the back steps with steaming mugs of coffee. The alley behind the diner wasn't beautiful. Dumpsters cracked pavement, the hum of the heater, but somehow those steps became the quietest place in town. One evening, Daniel held his cup in both hands, looking out at the snow drifting under the street lamp. My wife used to plant sunflowers, he said suddenly. Claire looked at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. He rarely spoke about her unless someone asked directly. She planted them, even when the soil was terrible, he went on. Swore she could coax anything to grow if she tended it long enough. His smile curved gently. She was right. Claire sipped her coffee, letting the warmth move through her. I like that, she said, someone who believed in what could grow. Daniel's eyes drifted toward her, lingering just long enough to make her heart misstep a small, careful flutter. And what about you? He asked. Favorite pie recipe? She laughed quietly, looking down at the rim of her mug. Blackberry, she said. The messy kind that stains your fingers and drips over the crust. Messy is good, he said softly. Their conversations never crossed any lines, but they were changing, deepening. Not flirtation, something older, calmer, rooted in understanding. The kind of connection two people build not from sparks, but from surviving hard winters and still wanting spring. The shift was subtle, but Claire felt it in the way he listened. In the way he paused before speaking, giving her room. In the way he relaxed around her, as if carrying less weight for a few minutes each night. It terrified her, sometimes the thought of letting someone this close again. But it also warmed her in a way she hadn't expected to feel anymore. One slow afternoon after the lunch rush cleared, Margaret Hayes pushed open the door. She carried a canvas bag of knitting as if she might stay a while. Daniel was out meeting a supplier, leaving the diner in a rare hush. Claire was wiping down tables when Margaret settled onto a stool at the counter, watching her with that steady, perceptive gaze. You handled the crowd well today, Margaret said. Didn't let that broken slush machine rattle you. Claire smiled awkwardly. I've had practice. You've had storms, Margaret corrected gently, and storms make steadier hands. She waited until Claire stood near her, then reached out and touched her wrist, a light but intentional gesture. My son's a good man, Margaret said, but he's been walking through life as if it's half over, not out of sadness, out of habit. Claire froze, unsure where this was going. Margaret continued, her voice warm, not intrusive. People who've lost someone, they can start hiding behind their work, their routines, their responsibilities. It's not so different from hiding under oversized clothes. Claire felt her breath catch in her throat. You and Daniel, Margaret said, you're both learning how to stop hiding. Don't forget that. Mrs. Hayes, Claire whispered, I don't want to complicate anything. He lost so much, so did you, Margaret said simply. Pain meets pain. Sometimes it cancels out, sometimes it grows into something else. Claire swallowed hard. I'm not sure he sees me that way. Margaret smiled, the kind of smile only a mother can give, half amusement, half certainty. My dear, she said, leaning in just a little, I've known that man for 45 years. I can tell you this, he looks at you the way a person looks when they finally remember what hope feels like. A soft flush warmed Claire's cheeks. She looked away, unsure how to hold that kind of truth. Margaret gathered her knitting bag and slid off the stool. "Don't let him hide behind work," she said gently as she headed toward the door. "The way you hid behind those clothes?" The bell chimed behind her, leaving Claire standing still in the center of the quiet diner. Heart, unsteady breath, thin, and a single new thought forming like a timid bloom. Maybe two people who had lost themselves could find something together, but she wasn't ready to say it aloud. Not yet. Snow still lined the roads, but sunlight lingered a little longer each afternoon, casting gold across the diner's windows. Claire settled into her role with quiet confidence, still cautious, still learning, but showing up every day with steadier hands. It almost felt like life was stitching itself back together. Then, on a Thursday morning, everything unraveled with a single notification. Piper rushed into the office, clutching her phone like it was a burning coal. "Claire, have you seen the Facebook group?" Claire frowned. "Which one?" "The Pine Ridge Neighbors group. Someone posted." Piper swallowed. "I think you should look." Claire's chest tightened before she even touched the phone. Years of instinct warned her that anything viral about her name couldn't be good. With trembling fingers, she opened the link Piper showed her. Her old Denver article filled the screen. The headline punched her like a fist, "A content under investigation for financial misconduct." Her picture, the professional headshot she used to be proud of, sat beside it. She looked confident in the photo, poised, the kind of woman who believed her work mattered. Comments piled below the post in a dizzying scroll. "Isn't she working at Hayes Diner now? Yikes. Wouldn't trust her with my tabs." That report was never resolved. Suspicious. People make mistakes. She seems nice. Nice doesn't mean honest. Why is she even here? Claire's throat tightened until breathing felt like swallowing gravel. Martha appeared in the doorway, worry etched across her face. "Honey." But Claire couldn't answer. She could only stare at the screen as this town, the one she dared to hope might become home, dissected her like she was a case file again. Then came the message that turned fear into a knife. Daniel's phone rang. He answered in the hallway, speaking quietly, but the break room door didn't hide everything. "Yes, I'm aware of the article," he said. "Yes, she works here." A pause. "Well, what exactly are you suggesting?" Claire felt her pulse thrum violently in her ears. Another pause. "You're considering cutting ties with us," Daniel repeated, voice growing sharper. Because of a reposted rumor from 6 years ago, Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. "Martha. Oh God, I can't go through this again." The call lasted another 30 agonizing seconds. When Daniel returned to the office, he shut the door behind him, not slamming it but firmly enough to signal something had shifted. He leaned on the edge of the desk and looked at Claire. She braced for disappointment, for caution, for distance. The same 3 steps every person in her life had taken before walking away completely. Instead, Daniel's voice came quiet but steady as bedrock. "That was Mountain Peak Foods," he said. "They're reconsidering supplying us. They don't want PR issues." Claire tried to speak, but the words crumbled in her throat. Daniel continued, "And a customer out front refused to hand you his credit card because he heard things." Her breath collapsed inward. Shame washed through her like an icy flood. She turned away. "I can quit." "No." "It's fine, it's not fine." His voice cut through her panic, not harsh, but resolute. The kind of tone a man used when he knew letting fear win would wound someone he cared about. But Claire shook her head desperately. "Daniel, if you keep me here, people will think you're protecting me. Or worse, that you don't care what I did. I don't want to be a liability." He stepped forward. "Claire, look at me." She didn't. Her hands trembled too much. He gently took her shoulders, not to restrain, not to force, but to anchor. When she finally lifted her eyes to his, she saw no uncertainty there. No calculation, no hesitation. Just loyalty, just truth. "I'm calling a staff meeting," Daniel said. "Right now." Claire blinked. "Why?" "Because we're not handling this in whispers." Minutes later, the small staff gathered in the break room. Piper the cooks, the servers, Martha, who had stayed behind the counter until the last second. They looked concerned, not hostile. Daniel stood at the front. "That article that's going around," he began. "We've all seen it, or heard about it. And you should know something." He turned and met Claire's eyes. "Claire told me the real story. Months ago, I know exactly what happened in Denver." A hush fell. Piper wiped her eyes. One of the cooks nodded slowly. Daniel continued. "That article can say what it wants. People on Facebook can say what they want. But we know who Claire is. We know the work she does. We know this diner runs smoother because of her." His voice deepened stronger, like a quiet drumbeat. "This diner stands with her." The words hit Claire's chest with the force of something she hadn't felt in years. Public belief. Public loyalty. Public protection. Daniel didn't stop. "If supporting Claire costs us business," he said, "then we'll find business elsewhere. But I'm not throwing away a good person because someone online wants a villain." The room stayed silent for a heartbeat, then Martha nodded firmly, arms crossed. "You got my vote." Piper lifted a hand like she was in class. "Mine too." The kitchen staff murmured their agreement. Even the dishwasher, who rarely spoke, said, "She's solid, boss." Claire's vision blurred as tears stung her eyes. No one had ever defended her like this. Not even her husband. Not her co-workers back then. Certainly not her old boss. She couldn't speak. She could only stand there, feeling something loosening inside her, something she had kept locked up for so long she forgot it was there. The belief that maybe she wasn't alone anymore. The belief that maybe staying visible wasn't a mistake. The belief that someone, an entire room of someone's, thought she deserved to stay. When the meeting ended, Daniel moved beside her, voice low so only she could hear. "We're not losing you, Claire." Her breath shuddered as she whispered, "I'm not sure I know how to stay." Daniel answered softly, "Then let me teach you." A tear slipped down her cheek, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming realization that someone wasn't stepping away. Someone was stepping closer. By the time the last customer left and the final mug clattered into the dishwasher, the diner felt unusually calm. The storm of online chatter had quieted, not disappeared, but softened into the background, the way winter wind fades after rattling every window in town. The neon sign flickered outside, glowing faintly against a night sky blooming with slow, heavy snowflakes. Daniel locked the front door, slid the deadbolt, and turned off the lights one by one. Claire wiped down the last counter, her motions steady, but her heart beating with a rhythm she didn't quite understand. The staff meeting the public support the way Daniel had stood firm when the world seemed ready to turn on her. All of it kept echoing inside her like a steady drumbeat. She stepped into her coat. He shrugged into his, and when they met by the door, something hovered in the space between them, unspoken, warm, waiting. Outside, the street lay hushed beneath the snowfall. The world looked softer, like someone had blurred its edges. Their footsteps crunched on the sidewalk as they walked to the edge of the diner's awning where snow touched the ground in thick, gentle flakes. Claire's breath curled into the cold air. "Daniel, thank you. I know I've said it before, but today was, you don't owe me thanks," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I do. I've had people defend me in private before. Whisper that they believed me, but no one ever stood beside me out loud. Not where it mattered." He watched her for a moment, his expression softening in a way that made her chest tighten. She looked down at her gloves. "I spent years trying to be just a set of hands, just a brain behind a screen. I thought if I hid my body, my face, my whole self, maybe I wouldn't be hurt again. Maybe people would judge only my work." "And did it work?" Daniel asked gently. Claire let out a breath that shook. "For a while, yes. Then it didn't. Then it just felt like I wasn't living anymore." Daniel's eyes warmed. He took a step closer, slow enough that she could move away if she needed to, but she didn't. "Claire," he said softly, "when I look at you, I don't see someone hiding. I see the woman who kept this place afloat when I was stretched thin. The woman who caught mistakes in invoices before they cost us money. The woman who stood up in a room full of people who could have judged her, and chose to tell the truth anyway." The snow fell heavier around them, flakes catching in her hair. The clothes, he said quietly, the dress, the hoodie. None of that changes who you are. It just lets the rest of the world see what I've been seeing for a long time. Her breath caught. Paired? She lifted her eyes and found his waiting steady, vulnerable, in a way she'd never seen before. He swallowed, rubbing the back of his neck, suddenly looking almost boyish, almost unsure. I didn't expect this, he said. Any of it. I loved my wife deeply, grieved her deeply. For years, I thought that part of my life was over. That love wasn't something I was allowed to feel again. And when I first noticed you, really noticed you, it scared me. Claire's breath softened into the cold air. Why? Because it felt like a betrayal, he admitted. Like caring about someone new meant turning my back on her memory. And I couldn't bear that. So I hid in my work, told myself it was enough. He looked at her then with a tenderness that unraveled something long knotted inside her. But then you walked into the winter light's benefit, he said, voice quieter than the snow. And I realized it wasn't betrayal. It was life. Coming back in a slow, careful way, her heart swelled painfully full. He continued, voice deep with truth. I've fallen in love with you, Claire. Not because of the dress, not because of anything you tried to be, but because of who you are when you're tired and honest. Because of your courage, your integrity, the way you look at the world, even after it's hurt you. I love you because you stayed kind. The snowfall seemed to hold still, suspended around them like the world was listening. Claire's eyes blurred, not from sadness, from relief so profound it felt like her bones exhaled. She took a small step forward, then another, until his breath warmed her forehead. Daniel, she whispered, maybe we both stopped living the day our lives fell apart. You lost your wife. I lost my reputation. We were both walking shadows. He closed his eyes for a moment as if her words touched somewhere deep. She lifted a gloved hand, hesitated, then gently took his. I don't want to hide anymore, she said. Not from you, not from this town, not from myself. Daniel's fingers curled around hers, warm even through the cold. Their foreheads touched, not rushed, not dramatic, just the quiet contact of two people finally letting their guard down. And then slowly, carefully, Daniel leaned in. No fireworks, no sweeping music, just a soft, steady kiss beneath the falling snow. A kiss that felt like stepping into a warm house after years of wandering outside. A kiss that felt like finding home again. When they finally parted, Claire rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong, steady, real. Daniel whispered into her hair, we take this slow, whatever pace you need. She nodded, eyes closing. For the first time in years, the future didn't terrify her. It waited. Early spring came slowly to Pine Ridge, the way most good things do in small mountain towns. Snow lingered in shady patches, but green shoots were beginning to push through the thawing earth. Morning sunlight streamed through the diner windows with a softness that made everything inside look warmer, kinder. The bell above the door jingled as Claire adjusted the chalkboard sign outside, a new addition she had approved herself. Accounting and management, Claire Whitmore. Yes, that Claire. Ask her how honesty saved her life. At first she'd blushed when Daniel suggested it. She'd laughed and swatted his arm when he wrote it the first time, his handwriting too big, too bold. But now, months later, she wrote the line neatly, proudly. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't a challenge. It was reclaiming. Inside, the morning rush was just beginning. Coffee stations, humming plates, sliding onto tables, familiar voices filling the space with routine warmth. Claire moved from counter to office to kitchen with a steadiness that once would have shocked her. Her clothes reflected the same shift, soft sweaters in colors she actually liked, jeans that fit her body instead of hiding it, hair loose more days than not. She still dressed modestly, but not to disappear. Not to shrink, just to be herself. And the people of Pine Ridge accepted her. Not perfectly small towns always had a handful of professional gossipers, but genuinely enough that those lingering whispers felt small and powerless. What mattered was everything else. The mayor waving from his usual booth. Piper's cheerful morning Claire, Margaret visiting every Wednesday for tea and a stern reminder to take breaks. Customers handing over credit cards now with complete trust. Competence had silenced suspicion. Kindness had softened prejudice. Presence, daily steady presence, had rewritten a story the internet once tried to claim as truth. Daniel stepped out of the kitchen, carrying 2 coffees. One he set on the counter next to her. "You rewrote the sign again," he said, with a smile hiding in his beard. "I clarified it," Claire corrected. "Last week people thought 'ask her how honesty saved her life' was some sort of church slogan." Daniel chuckled. "Well, honesty did save your life." She raised an eyebrow. "No, people saved my life." "People are tricky," he said. "Honesty's more reliable." She laughed softly, something she did far more often these days. "I think I'll take both." They moved naturally around each other, in the quiet choreography that happens only when 2 people have learned each other's rhythms. The staff saw it, of course, the way Daniel's gaze found her in a room, the way Claire relaxed when he stood close. But the relationship wasn't dramatic or showy. It was steady. Mature. A partnership built slowly the way healing gardens grow after harsh winters. Late that afternoon, when the diner thinned out to just a few regulars, Daniel leaned against the counter and unfolded a blueprint. "I want to show you something," he said. "Tell me what you think." Claire wiped her hands on a towel and leaned closer. "Is this—" "The empty storefront next door," Daniel said. "It used to be a crafts shop before it closed. I've been thinking, maybe it's time to expand." Claire blinked. "Expand the diner," or he said, carefully open a small bakery beside it. She stared at him, startled. "Daniel, that's your dream." "Not mine." "No," he said, shaking his head. "The diner was my wife's dream. This would be ours." Her breath caught. He traced a finger over the drawing, the layout of display cases, a prep kitchen, a shared hallway between the 2 buildings. "You've got a good head for numbers," he said. "I've got the food experience. Together, I think we could build something beautiful." Claire felt warmth rise through her chest, slowly and deeply. Not excitement that burned too hot, but the kind that settled into the bones, the kind she could trust. "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered. "Then we learn," he replied, without hesitation. "Failure's not the enemy. Hiding is." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the man who had defended her, but the man who had healed beside her, step by step. His life had cracked open 2 years ago. And somehow, in all that broken space, they'd found room for each other. Near the window, Margaret and Martha sipped their tea, both pretending not to watch, but absolutely watching. Margaret lifted her eyebrow in a way that made Claire laugh under her breath. "They're rooting for us," Claire murmured. "They've been rooting for us for months," Daniel replied. "We're just catching up." A comfortable quiet settled over them. The late sun dipped lower, throwing golden light across the booths. The diner, once just a place Claire came to hide behind numbers and endless receipts, now felt like something else entirely. Home. Not because it protected her, but because she no longer needed protection the way she once did. She glanced down at her hands, remembering how they used to tremble just holding a menu or greeting a customer. "Not anymore. I used to think loose clothing would keep me safe," she said softly. "That if people couldn't see me, they couldn't hurt me." Daniel stepped beside her. And now Claire looked up at him, not through fear, but with the clarity of someone who has come back to herself. "Now I know what really protects me," she said. "Truth, self-worth, and the people who choose to see me clearly." His eyes warmed. "I see you, Claire. And I see you." Margaret clinked her spoon against her cup knowingly. Martha beamed behind her glasses. The town, the diner, the quiet hum of spring beginning. It all felt like a gentle chorus, witnessing her standing fully in her own life, for the first time in years. As Daniel folded the blueprint and tucked it away, Claire reached for his hand, not out of fear, but out of certainty. For the first time in a long, long while, she wasn't shrinking herself to stay safe. She wasn't hiding behind layers of fabric or layers of silence. She was standing at the front of her own life, and she wasn't alone. Sometimes healing begins in the quietest places, in a diner at sunrise, in the soft courage of being seen again, or in a single moment when someone finally believes in us. Claire's journey reminds us that hiding may keep us safe, but it can also keep us small. And we deserve more than smallness. There are chapters in life that break us open, leaving pieces we're sure can't fit together anymore. But then someone comes along, a friend, a stranger, a community, and gently shows us that our worth didn't vanish just because our world once did. And perhaps the most tender truth of all is this: we don't heal by erasing what hurt us, we heal by letting the right people see us anyway. You don't have to step into the light all at once. But when you're ready, even if you're trembling, you may find that love, dignity, and belonging were waiting for you there all along. A quiet reminder: you were never meant to live unseen. Stories like Claire's stories of courage, quiet healing, and second chances only matter because there are people like you willing to listen, to feel, and to carry a little more kindness into the world afterward. If this story touched you, even in a small way, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you love, every like, share, and subscribe helps us bring more of these human stories to life. Stories that touch the soul, soften the heart, and remind us we're never alone. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for choosing compassion,